Hi guys, so just a quick video and it's going to be on energy systems. So just a quick overview of energy systems themselves, and hopefully this can help you with any revision that you might have. So first thing is first, how many do we have? We have 3 energy systems in the body. We need to split this down into categories just to make it a bit easier to understand. So when you're training, if you're training quite, let's say on a light, sort of basis, this is known as aerobic. Okay, so we're training with the presence of oxygen. Okay, so aerobic means training with the presence of oxygen. Then on the opposite end of the scale, we have anaerobic. So when we go over that threshold, when we start working, really hard, we then start to train anaerobically. That's training without the presence of oxygen. Okay, so just knowing that allows you to identify, the 3 energy systems a bit better. Okay, it allows you to understand them a bit more. So, 3 energy systems, and we can train aerobically or anaerobically. 1 energy system that is aerobic, or which is aerobic. 2, or the other 2 energy systems are anaerobic. So, the aerobic energy system, as you've probably guessed it already, is aerobic. Yep, so it goes hand in hand. So really, really easy to understand that one. So if we're training with the presence of oxygen and we're training aerobically, we will be utilizing the aerobic energy system, okay, as a priority. We teach them individually, but pretty much the systems are working together to help resynthesize the others whilst the other one is working, if that makes sense. But we do them individually because generally in an exam or a test, it'll ask you individual questions, not how they combine together. So that's the first one, aerobic. So when we're training aerobically. Then we have 2 anaerobic. One of them is the lactic acid energy system. The other one, okay, or the last one, is the creatine phosphate or phosphocreatine energy system. They're your 2 anaerobic. What you need to just remember as well is it's called the lactic acid energy system, but we don't actually produce lactic acid. Okay, something, for instance, a cow, that literally walks around a field, chews grass, goes moo, they produce lactic acid. We produce lactate. So it can become a bit confusing when you're reading literature, and 1 minute it's talking about the lactic acid energy system, the next minute it's saying that we're producing lactate. Some people even refer it to the lactate system. It's the same thing. Don't think there's a 4th system out there, if that makes sense. So a couple of characteristics about the energy systems to sort of summarize and wrap up the video. I'm not going to go into too much depth. That'll be more videos. Otherwise, the video is going to last 20, 30, maybe even 40 minutes long. So, aerobic. We know that the system, obviously, we're working aerobically or with the presence of oxygen. So oxygen is going to be a massive fuel source. Okay, oxygen and fats. Okay, the reason why fats is there is because fats have to be oxidized to then be utilized for energy. So oxygen and fats, okay, are obviously the main fuel source. Byproducts, obviously, whenever we take in a fuel, we will have a byproduct that comes out at the other end. Think of, a car. We feed it, we fuel it with petrol. Okay, the byproduct is going to be water coming out of the exhaust pipe. Okay, and obviously emissions. There's going to be fumes that come out of the exhaust pipe as well. So, in the case of the aerobic system, oxygen and fats are the fuel, and the byproduct is going to be carbon dioxide and water. Yep, we breathe in the oxygen, and obviously we breathe out carbon dioxide. So that is the waste product. In terms of time, with a given activity or exercise, it's pretty much infinite. If I'm walking, that can be deemed as an exercise. We're all able to walk for hours and hours and hours. So you've got to think of aerobic. As long as I can get oxygen in, transport it and utilize it, that's me working aerobically. So it could be, I could classify that as an hour's workout. I could classify it as a 4-hour workout. I could classify it as running the marathon. Think about endurance-based activities or your endurance-based athletes. Okay, so that pretty much summarizes that. Go into more detail. One other point that you could sort of look into is that we predominantly use type 1 muscle fibers when using the aerobic system. So, and I've got a video on muscle fiber types. So if you're not too sure on the different fiber types, you can have a look at that video. we'll move on now to the 2 anaerobic. Obviously 3 in total. We spoke about the aerobic. We've got 2 anaerobic left. So the 2 anaerobic, we'll start off with the lactic acid system. So we produce lactate, so that's one thing to know about the system. Obviously, another point to note is it's anaerobic, as we know. So we're training without the presence of oxygen. The fuel source, okay, is going to be mainly carbohydrates. Okay, so you can sort of see the system as being called the lactic acid system, the lactate system, obviously fed by carbohydrates. It can be known as the fast system, the fast glycolytic system, the fast glycolytic lactic acid system. There's so many different variables, okay? We're just describing the characteristics that make up the name. Okay, so you can call it any which one of those that you like. I'm going to call it the lactic acid system or energy system. The reason why people call it, obviously, the lactic acid or the fast glycolytic is because we need our fast twitch or type 2 muscle fiber to engage. Okay, that's pretty much what you're going to use when you're training anaerobically or without the presence of oxygen. So again, if you need to look at muscle fiber types to sort of close these in or combine these 2 subjects together to make a little bit more sense, then please do so. And obviously the characteristics, obviously type 2 muscle fibers or your fast twitch. The word glycolytic, okay, just derives from carbohydrates. Okay, so we eat carbohydrates. The body then breaks those carbohydrates down into glucose. Okay, glucose is what we can use, that's the sugar, if you will, that we can utilize for energy. Okay, energy is the way it gets broken down, and we actually utilize energy is a bit more complicated, which will be in another video. So I've eaten carbohydrates, it's broken down into glucose. I either use it, or the body then works out that I don't need to use that glucose at the time. So then what it does is it stores that glucose as glycogen. Okay, so some of you might have seen the term glucose and glycogen. It's the same thing. Glucose is the usable name, glycogen is the storage name. Yeah, and we store that glycogen in the muscle, okay, and the liver. We put a reserve of it in the liver, if that makes sense. Okay, one thing to note on glycogen or glucose, when it's stored in the muscles, whether it's the biceps, the deltoids, pectoralis major, minor, whatever it may be, it can only be exclusively used for that muscle. Okay, it's not like you can just keep training legs and then your legs turn around or your quads turn around to your bicep and say, run out of glycogen, can you send some down? It doesn't do that. Once the glycogen stores are depleted in that area, you have to refuel to make sure that area is then topped up with glycogen. Happy with that? Or glucose or carbohydrates. So that's why they're sometimes called fast glycolytic, the system. So that's obviously the fuel. So the fuel is going to be carbohydrates. Unfortunately, for the lactic acid system, the byproduct is lactate. Lactate is very fatiguing. Okay, and what it does, and the reason why it's fatiguing, is it pushes your acidity levels up in your blood. The more acid we have in the blood, the more fatigued we're going to feel, the more the body is trying to bring the levels of acidity in your blood back down to a nice normal sort of balance, a nice pH balance, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's why. So if you think, well, why is lactate really fatiguing? It pushes the acidity levels up in the blood. Okay, so generally what you'll find is that your performance will drop, or you'll have to stop exercising. Yeah, you'll feel really fatigued. Okay, so aerobic, we're going to fatigue after long periods of time. Generally, your muscles are going to fatigue first. Okay, if you're training aerobically, as opposed to this, it's normally the lactic acid that will fatigue you first. Okay, so you have to slow your performance down, or you have to stop. Last but not least, the creatine phosphate system. So that is your other anaerobic system. So this is for really high intensity, short duration. Okay, not short duration because we choose to do short duration, but because the creatine, the fuel, it runs out. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it will run out. So basically what you need to think of is, if I train as hard as I physically can, and generally what we use with clients is the RPE scale, so 1 being the easiest, 10 being the hardest. If you're at a 10, a 9/10, you're only going to be able to last for 10 seconds. Think about a 100-meter sprint. Yeah, you generally, even if you're good at doing that, I mean, for us, for the mere mortal, if you will, we're going to be probably doing 60 to 80 meters in 10 seconds, whereas obviously, an Olympic athlete, Usain Bolt, for example, is going to be doing 100 meters, in 10 seconds. So his creatine phosphate system needs to be nice and efficient, and he needs to be, training in that system all the time, teaching the body to, to work in that system and then recover that system as quickly as possible. So the good thing about that system is it's normally down to muscular fatigue that stops you training in this system, because creatine is non-fatiguing. Okay, so the fuel source is creatine, the system is called creatine, and the byproduct is also creatine. So we can basically resynthesize that quite quickly. It only takes in between, about 2 to 5 minutes, depending on how efficient you are, how often you train in that system. That's going to be how long it takes you to resynthesize that system, and then going to be able to go again. So again, someone like Usain Bolt will generally run 100 meters, let's say, for example. He obviously does other things for training, but he runs 100 meters or he sprints 100 meters. It will have generally around 2 to 5 minutes off. Okay, it will stay nice and warm during that time, but he won't do anything else explosive in that time. He needs to allow, his creatine phosphate system to resynthesize, so then he can do another 100-meter sprint. All the coach will be looking for is if he goes again and his performance drops radically, then nutrition might be an issue, or the rest and recovery wasn't enough. It didn't allow enough time for the creatine phosphate system to then resynthesize. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we've got a balance. We need to know what system that we're using out of the 3. We need to know how to fuel that system. I've just told you the fuels for those. Okay, so obviously oxygen and fats, make sure you're getting good fatty acids in. Carbohydrates, if you're using a lactic acid system quite a lot, make sure you've got a good source of carbs coming in. And obviously creatine phosphate, make sure you're eating foods that contain good amounts of creatine for that creatine phosphate system. So they're the fuels. Byproducts, okay, aerobic, like we mentioned, was with carbon dioxide and water. The lactate system, or lactic acid, or fast glycolytic system, is carbohydrates. That's the fuel. And then the byproduct is lactic acid, very fatiguing. Creatine phosphate system, creatine is the fuel source, but it's also the byproduct, and it's non-fatiguing. So timelines, just to finish off. Aerobic system, like we discussed, could last for hours and hours. Great, happy days. If I start to push my intensity up, I'm then going to be using obviously my lactic acid system or my lactate. Okay, as long as I'm going over that aerobic to anaerobic threshold, I've got to be training anaerobically for that. That can last anything from 1.5 minutes to 3-4 minutes. Yep. It just depends again on how efficient that you are, with that actual system. And then your creatine phosphate system generally lasts about 10 seconds. It's not, again, like I say, it's not because we choose to perform for that time. It's because that's when those fuel sources run out and we need to replenish them. So we only have the storage capability in our body to hold on to about 10 seconds worth. So think about, a cupboard. If I have a cupboard, that can only store 10 boxes in it and it's full, I cannot get any more. Once I've used up those 10 boxes, I have no boxes left. That's it. That my cupboard only stored 10 boxes in it. So there's nothing I can do about that. Okay, so that's one of the reasons. So you must make sure you know what energy systems you need to train in order or you need to know how to fuel and how long the system's going to last to make sure you're in the right system. Being in the right system makes a massive difference, because then that correlates generally to the person's goals, because depending on what system you use will then depend on what percentage of the max heart rate the client is at, or it will depend what percentage of the 1 rep max the client is at, which will then depend, again, how their body is going to physiologically change. Are they going to lose weight as a result? Or are they in a good weight loss area, let's say? Obviously there's loads of other factors like having to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight. Or are they trying to put on muscle? So you need to know what you need to be doing in the gym, what energy system that is needed to actually do that activity, and how to fuel the activity, how long it's going to last, etc. So you're not asking your client to sprint for 30 seconds. They're not going to be able to do that. Yeah, because we know that the creatine phosphate system that basically fuels you doing a sprint doesn't last that long. Happy with that? So you've got to think about, you've got to always boil it back to energy systems. We can't perform in the right way if we don't fuel the energy systems and don't use the energy systems in the right way. If it's for aesthetics, we still have to bring it back. So if your client's not bothered about performance at all, they're like, I don't care what I can do, I just want to look a certain way, it would still boil back to energy systems. Because like I mentioned at the beginning, we're either going to trigger type 1 or type 2 fibers. If we want to grow, we need to stimulate, we need to really sort of work and hit on a repetitive basis our type 2 fiber, because that will grow, whereas our type 1 fiber, it won't grow. It can become more efficient, but it won't grow in size. So it's really important that we know. Okay, so that's why I'm giving you a bit of information there about the reasons why we need to know about energy systems. So if you do a course in instruction or personal training, or if you're a PT already and you're finding it a bit hard to train your clients or program for your clients, this is the sort of thing you need to be thinking about. If you're not thinking about the energy system or how the client is going to perform, they're really going to struggle essentially.